Welcome to KIRO Radio's 2020 Election Townhall. I'm Ursula Reutin, and I am joined by my friends and colleagues, Dave Ross and Dori Monson. Hi, guys.
Yo ho! Hi. Good to see you guys.
long time no see, too long for sure. So we are holding these virtual town halls to help our listeners and all of you who are watching get ready for the election coming up on November 3rd. So Dori and Dave, you guys
There's an election coming up? Why is nobody discussing this?
Seriously, right?
Yeah, I got to start phoning up, crying out loud.
Okay, this is a great way to start because we are going to be talking about the governor's race. And I'm going to just start right off.
I'm sorry to laugh. I'm looking at Dave's box here. I feel like I'm talking to Methuselah.
Thank you. you just made the last 6 months of beard growth worth it.
That's what I'm here for, Dave.
I was thinking of Moses.
Yeah.
Methuselah will do.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, Ursula. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, okay, here we go. So there is a new statewide poll out of Washington voters that shows Governor Jay Inslee with a double-digit lead over his Republican challenger, Loren Culp. Inslee, of course, wants a third term. He has 53% support, according to this poll, compared with 36% for Culp. Now, that's a pretty wide gap. So I'm going to start off with you, Dori. The two are going to have their first debate on October 7th. Do you think Culp has a chance to make it close or even possibly win this race? Why or why not?
No, I do not. I like Culp. I like him a lot. I've had him on the show many, many times. I've invited Inslee, who used to come on regularly. I've invited him on. We've reached out a dozen times in the last couple of months. Jay Inslee's taking the Joe Biden approach. He's just going to hide out, hope that his lead can stand up. But look, Loren Culp's a constitutionalist. He's so far from what most of Seattle, which drives elections, wants. I think that we desperately need some new blood. I think that it is criminal that our state unemployment office with Jay Inslee at he's the one who brought in Susie Levine and they say that it was 650 million stolen by Nigerian scammers. The fact that, are unemployed, some of them still haven't gotten paid. I think that's just outrageous mismanagement. And I do not think that Jay Inslee has been a great governor. He lied to me and my listeners when he said he would not raise taxes, and he's been at the helm of the 5 biggest tax increases in the history of the state. Having said all of that, I do not think Loren Culp has a realistic chance. I like him. I will vote for Loren Culp, but no, he does not have a chance.
Dave.
I talked to Loren Culp for, I guess, about a half hour, and I liked him too. We sparred a little bit about state spending, but I don't think he has a chance. That's not to denigrate him for trying. Having done a little bit of politicking myself in the distant past, it's a commitment. So good for him for seizing on the opportunity and trying to make a go of it. As for new blood, actually, I can't disagree, Dori, that there ought to be new blood, but nobody wanted to step up and challenge Jay. And maybe it is time to have mandatory term limits in Washington. If you had that, then it would be an open seat, and you might encourage others to do that. What else? I mean, I know.
Well, here's a question. Here's a question, just to follow up. Would a moderate Republican have had a better chance than Loren Culp? I know that the more mainstream Republican Party.
Imagine if Rob McKenna had won. I think that would be a serious contest. For example, I talk to Rob every week, and we get along just fine. My concern, beyond the fact that it's Loren Culp is a long shot, even if he wasn't a long shot, he's the kind of guy I think who would bring more drama to Washington State than I'd feel comfortable with. I mean, he clearly was planning to shake things up. He was asserting this idea that if either the federal government or I assume the state legislature ordered him to do something or passed a law that he considered to be unconstitutional, he would just decline to enforce it, which to me is trouble.
Yeah, I saw Rob McKenna just a couple nights ago, and he's a very smart guy. He's probably making triple what he'd make as governor, or quadruple, or 10 times, I don't know. But and Dino Rossi, I will forever remain convinced Dino Rossi beat Christine Gregoire. That was the shadiest, most stolen election. He wins the count, he wins the first recount, and then they find ballots behind the refrigerator at King County elections. So, Rossi has shown that, a moderate Republican could win, but that was 16 years ago. And we have gotten so much more radical politically that to mobilize, both on the left and on the right, to really mobilize people, I think it takes a certain measure of extremism. But and while Loren Culp is certainly at the far right of the spectrum, Jay Inslee is at the far left of the spectrum. Jay Inslee has drifted so far to the left, to the point where 48 hours after CHOP began, Jay Inslee said, "Oh, it's the first I've heard about that. I'll look into it," because he didn't want to risk alienating radicals who were taking over the streets of the biggest city in his state. He is so capitulated to this radical element. So I don't know if a moderate would have a better chance this year. I think radicals at both ends of the spectrum are driving the messaging right now.
I don't know.
So this same poll,
I mean, this happened in cities across the country, not just here. And for a leftist, he sure gave a nice big fat tax break to a giant corporation. So, by which I mean Boeing. So this is like calling Joe Biden a radical leftist. I don't buy that.
Okay, I disagree. And the Boeing thing, when he was asked about that as he was running for president, Jay Inslee said, "Oh yeah, if I could do that over again, I wouldn't give that to them," because he was trying to appeal to the people at the further end of the spectrum on that issue. Because I do think that Jay Inslee was more about trying to compete for business. I think Inslee. Do you agree, Dave, that Inslee was dramatically more moderate 8 years ago than he is today?
I guess, although I frankly haven't followed him that much. When you talk about being moderate, I look at concrete things like how money is spent. So what's the biggest spending he did? Education, right? I mean, and that's something that everybody values and that has not been equal across this state. So he and there was a lot of negotiation on that. Spent a tremendous amount, increased by a huge factor the amount of money spent on education. But that to me is not radical to educate school children. And on Boeing, the whole reason for that is that at least back then, Boeing drove the state, right? I mean, the last thing you needed if you wanted to make life better for Washingtonians was for Boeing to pick up and leave. And they clearly say, from the moment they moved to Chicago, they signaled that Washington State was no longer special.
Yeah,
and
I agree with you on that. Yeah, I think we're not in a vacuum, and we got to compete with South Carolina and all these other bidders that wanted Boeing. I don't have a huge problem with him competing for Boeing, and I think that's where I saw him more as kind of a pragmatist, business governor who wasn't going to lose our, at the time, most significant employer to another state. So I don't fault him for that at all, believe me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So this same poll by Strategies 360 shows nearly 60% approve of how Governor Inslee has been handling the pandemic. What grade would you give the governor for how the state has dealt with COVID so far, and why? And I'm going to start with Dave.
I'll give him a B plus, only because I think sometimes he comes across as sanctimonious. He sort of puts on his green energy hat, when he's talking about COVID. But other than that, the only other thing is I don't think he was very clear at the beginning, for example, why he closed down private construction projects but not public construction projects. That part I didn't get. It didn't seem to be based on the science. To me, a project is a project, and either the project crew has the equipment to mask up and be safe, or they don't. Other than that, though, the objections of people like, the barbers in Snohomish and stuff like that, we now know that this is an unbelievably deadly disease. I was just looking at the figures today, and Real Clear Politics has a coronavirus chart where they do what I think is the comparison that we should be actually paying attention to. They have a column which shows what the normal flu season, how many people die in a normal flu season. I think it's averaged over several years, right? And then they compare it to the number of COVID. It's an order of, it's 10 times worse. In New York City, in New York, for example, New York State, number of COVID deaths, 10 times the flu amount. I mean, this is a scourge. So I can only imagine what would have happened had he taken a no face mask approach. Had he taken the Trump approach, it would have been a catastrophe. So the things that the people criticize him for, the masks and the shutdown, except for that strange decision not to close down public projects while closing down private ones, I don't fault him for that at all.
Dori?
I give him a D for a lot of reasons. I agree with what Dave said about public versus private. Our data daddy has not followed any data. And what I'm particularly concerned about is our kids. Let's start with college kids. There was just a study that came out, 37 colleges, 48,000 cases of coronavirus. And that's what gets all the attention. The Greek row at WSU, University of Alabama, gigantic outbreak, 48,000 cases of coronavirus. Out of those 48,000 cases, 2 hospitalizations, 0 deaths. This is not a threat to younger people in our society. And then let's go to younger than college. It is outrageous that our school kids, K through 12, are not back in school. We have the most stringent standard in our state. We have to be below 5, I believe it's 5 cases per 100,000 people. That is half of what Harvard has called for. It is 1/7 of what other states are calling for. By far, we have the most stringent standards. And I continue to hear from parents and kids who are depressed. They've lost all their extracurriculars, whether it be sports or drama or band. Drama saved my life. I mean, if this had happened my senior year in high school, I probably wouldn't be here today. Drama saved my life. And the fact that these kids have been cut off, so many of them, we've got domestic abuse through the roof. We have kids who are, according to the CDC, who are overdosing on drugs and committing suicide at record rates. The number of kids we have lost, just the increase in the OD and suicide numbers versus whatever the danger would have been if we had opened up our schools. 38 states in the country are playing high school football right now. Our kids are not. I think that it is outrageous given that, and I agree with you, Dave, for elderly people, it is a danger. For young, healthy people, it is not. And to continue to do this to them, and now we have a long fall ahead and dreary weather. I really fear what's going to happen to our kids if we keep them locked up and sitting in front of a computer. I've only been sitting in front of this computer screen with you guys for 16 minutes, and I'm already depressed.
Yeah.
Dave?
I think there's an important consideration here. It's not just about the death count. From what I hear, young people, it's true, very few of them die. But some of them will probably have lifelong compromising medical consequences. That's one of the things. And the other part is, it's not just about students. For education to take place, there's got to be teachers. And I can tell you from the teachers I know, there's a lot of fear because they are, I don't know, you probably may know the breakdown more than I do, but you have, of course, a high death count in the 80 and up category, but you also have quite a high death count in the 40 to 60 category. And I'm sorry, or the 50 to 80 category. Anyway, the category where there are a lot of teachers. And I think it's the concerns among the teachers that are driving this. But I'm ready to compromise. I think I did a commentary a while back where I said, let's just go school by school and let the parents vote. So if you want to be an in-person school and you decide to do that, then we find the teachers who are young enough to feel secure about, teaching in that school, and the parents who are happy to send their kids to it. And for the rest of them, they can do the online school. Because I agree with you. I mean, I feel almost guilty that I had a trouble-free, school career where nothing like this ever happened. But there is a thing worse than missing your drama class, and that's having an illness that sticks with you for the rest of your life.
Well, if I can just rebut that real quick. I mean, if you're citing a stat from the 50 to 80 category, and 98% of those deaths are 70 to 80, those are not teachers. And in the age grouping where teachers are, kids are not effective transmitters of this disease. There's no known case in any state that has opened up of coronavirus being transmitted from a kid to a school employee. There's not one known case of that in the country, and many states have opened up. And so I just think that the damage we're doing to our children right now is incalculable. And I fear it greatly. I think that it's outrageous that, and did you hear the quote, Dave? I don't know if you played it on Seattle's Morning News from the WEA president about 2 weeks ago. And he said, why does it matter if our kids are falling behind? If everybody's falling behind, then no one is falling behind. I mean, that's a direct quote. And it's an outrageous statement. It's an outrageous disregard for our kids because the rest of the country is not falling behind right now. And I think it's the teachers' union that's driving this shutdown of the schools. They want to get the same pay for a fraction of the work. They don't have kids crying at their desk. They don't have any disciplinary issues they have to deal with, and they're getting the same pay. I think the union's driving this. I don't think this has one thing to do with public health.
I'd be curious to hear from teachers who think that Zooming is a fraction of the work. I've heard, in fact, just the opposite, because there's now so much one-on-one going, and you're basically on call now all day. I don't know if that's true or not, but go ahead and let's try the experiment. I don't believe, are there other states who are, everyone's going back to school with no problem?
Yeah.
They're not going back. Wait a minute. They're not going back to school with no problem. And I say this as someone who, whether it's at the college level or, as you guys know, I am on the Blanchette Advisory Board, and they want to open. I mean, there's pressure to open, they want to open, but there are a lot of things that you have to consider, including what do you do if there is an outbreak? How do you deal with the teachers who are feeling more vulnerable? There are some parents who want to do it, some parents who don't. So I love the idea of the experiment. I don't know that schools are equipped to deal with, what's being proposed.
I mean, we started going back to church, right, in person. To do that, I have to register the night before, get there 20 minutes early. We are escorted to a specific, this is St. James Cathedral, so this is a huge space, right? There shouldn't be any problem with social distancing. They only allow 200 people in, and you're escorted to your seat, and you have to receive, communion in a certain way, so there's no touching involved. There's logistical problems to doing that. So, I mean, I'm sure there's a way to open up schools safely. There are schools that are going to try. I believe they're going to try it here on Mercer Island. I'm not absolutely sure about that. It may require a mixture of Zooming and in person. But I don't think this is being driven actually by the government trying to control us. I think it's being driven by the concerns of parents and teachers. I don't think teachers are lazy, Dori. I don't think teachers are looking for a free ride.
Look, my wife works in the public schools, and I see the work she's putting in while working from home. I know there are teachers who are going into the building because they want to have a whiteboard behind them. I didn't say teachers are lazy. I never said that. I said the teachers union is driving this, and the rhetoric about if everyone's falling behind, then no one's falling behind. I think that is an outrageous statement on their part, and I have a great separation and respect between the union and their mission versus individual teachers, most of whom are driven by a calling. As for opening up the churches, that's just a game of probability. I mean, you take a risk for eternal life. I mean, yeah, of course you'll do that, for crying out loud. I'll take that chance anytime.
Okay, I want to go back to the governor's race. So during a recent rally in Port Angeles, more than 1,000 people filled a park to hear Loren Culp and several other Republican candidates speak. So only a few people were wearing masks. Most of the speakers were protesting against Inslee's handling of COVID, many of them calling him a dictator. So both of you have interviewed Loren Culp on your shows. Actually, we have too. What specifically did you hear from Loren about his COVID response plan that you agree or disagree with? And I'll start with you, Dori.
I don't know that I heard any specifics that made him stand out. I mean, he's an anti-masker. I'm not. I have no problem wearing a mask when I go into a private business. I abide by what a private business dictates are. I will never wear a mask outside. Joe Biden has repeatedly said that if president, he'll mandate mask wearing when you go outside. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But, to directly answer your question, Ursula, I haven't heard anything specific from Loren Culp that I agree or disagree with. I will say that it is outrageous that we have had, nightly protests, many of which have morphed into riots for months now. But when a bunch of Christians wanted to go to Gasworks Park to pray, the city of Seattle, at incredible expense, put up a chain link fence and prevented that from happening. And that's where I say, so much of this is about politics and not public health, where they closed down a park for the sole reason that it was Christians who wanted to pray, when we have protests and riots every night. I've told the Christians, if you just scream something horribly anti-cop every few minutes when you gather to pray, you'll be fine. Nobody will have a problem with you then.
Yeah, I think that was a tactical error on the church's part. They should have just shown up and had the service without tipping anybody.
They did it in the street. They showed up anyway, and they did it in the street.
But that's worse, though. That's sort of backfired.
So just, okay, and Dave, you can answer this. So, you can talk about Loren's specific plan if you heard anything, but also the idea of not wearing a mask in a big crowd. Would you just say, whether you're protesting or whether you're holding a big gathering, you have to wear a mask, or do you make exceptions?
On what Culp said, the only comment I recall him saying is that it was ridiculous to close down barber shops while abortions were allowed to go on. So that's really the only thing that came up during our discussion. As for wearing the mask in public, the mask is annoying, but it's not a problem to me. I wear it in the grocery store. I don't have really close encounters with people, but to me, it's such a minor thing. Why not do it? Outside, when we take our walks around the neighborhood, I don't wear one. I have one nearby. There are some people, for example, if you're approaching somebody on the sidewalk, they'll cross to the other side of the street. So sometimes I'll wear it just to make other people feel comfortable.
No, they're crossing because of your beard. It has nothing to do with you being unmasked. It's that you look like the Unabomber right now. Yeah.
That's true.
By the way, I'm just looking at the screens here. Do I look more orange than Trump in this lighting right now?
No, you look like you've been in Chelan for about 2 weeks. You're looking kind of tan there.
Can we fix that in post?
Ursula, does my lighting make my beard look fat?
I've asked Simeona if he could make me look like J-Lo. How's that? Okay, we'll move on here. So the governor and Loren Culp have agreed to a debate finally on TV on October 7th. There was a lot of disagreement over the terms of this event. They will now be in separate rooms at the headquarters of TVW in Olympia. Loren Culp wanted face-to-face debate with Inslee, and Inslee did not. Your thoughts on this upcoming debate, and is it going to make any kind of difference? Debates in general. Dori.
It's not going to make any kind of a difference. And I'm going to go back 8 years. And I remember on election night, Dave, you and I were working together. It was when it was Jay Inslee versus Rob McKenna. And I don't want to sound too harsh here. I think that there's a chasm intellectually between Inslee and McKenna. And I remember even asking you that question on election night, Dave. And I don't think there's a gigantic chasm between Inslee and Culp. I think Culp's a good man. I think he's well-intentioned. But, you know, look, if McKenna couldn't beat Inslee with no track record other than congressional, if McKenna couldn't beat Inslee 8 years ago, now that Inslee has this name recognition and this perception that I think's misguided, that he's handled coronavirus well, it's not going to make a difference. Maybe it'll expose some gaps in Inslee's logic, but it's not going to be a huge factor.
I don't think we actually elect politicians for their intellect. I think we elect them.
Oh, you're just saying that because you didn't get elected to Congress.
No, I didn't run on intellect.
Would have won hands down.
If we did, you'd be czar by now, Dave. Come on.
Well, I don't think so. I don't really feel that way about my intellect. No, I think you elect them for their ability to get things done, to move legislation, right? And one thing that Inslee seems to be able to do is sit down and talk to people and get them to pass stuff, whether you agree with it or not. I don't know. Do you remember the Natural Law Party, Dori, from back in the day?
Yeah.
They'd put up a candidate for president, and he'd always be an intellectual powerhouse. I mean, they write books and everything, and you'd sit and you interview them, and they knew all the right answers. That's the thing that bugged me. They knew exactly what had to be done to reshape society, and I said, but you see, you're not going to get anywhere unless you can convince others that you're this smart. And that's what bothers me about politicians who get into the game saying, elect me, I'm the smartest one. I don't think that's what makes you a success. It's good to be smart, but you also have to acknowledge that other people might not agree with you and figure out a way to bring them along. That to me is the most important skill.
That's what baffles me a little bit about Inslee. I mean, I get Trump as a populist. I do. I think that his bluster is, it's cartoonish, but I get it. I don't understand the appeal of Jay Inslee because he doesn't strike me as a horribly relatable person. He doesn't strike me as somebody who's a, faux intellectual, and yet he's had this incredible career in Congress and now soon to be a 3-term governor. And that's one that baffles me, except I just get that politics in our state are driven by King County in general, Seattle in particular. And if you have a D next to your name, you got about a 25-yard head start and a 100-yard sprint. And so I can rationalize Inslee's success, but I can't really make sense of it from just, analytical standpoint.
So Governor Inslee, of course, as you know, failed in his run for president. That's one of the reasons why he's now running for a 3rd term. Climate change continues to be his main focus, or one of them anyway. Do you think he's angling for a job in a potential Biden-Harris administration? Start with you, Dave.
I don't think so. I don't know. Would you give up the setup here to go to Washington, D.C. again? I don't think he enjoyed it in Washington that much, actually, especially when he was in the minority. That's why he had the time to write that book, I'm pretty sure. So I don't know. He is a true believer. He obviously is a true believer. He considers that climate change is a threat to civilization, which it may be, by the way. I wasn't sure I was convinced, but, when the neighborhood starts burning down, it's sort of a come to Jesus moment. But I don't know. Would you go back? I mean, Dori, if you got the chance, in an administration you agreed with, to go back to Washington and be a cabinet secretary, would you do that?
I wouldn't go into politics for
$5
million a year.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go into any aspect of politics. I think 100%, I disagree with you, Dave, 100%. Jay Inslee is angling for a cabinet position. I think he is bored, silly, as governor. He doesn't show any interest in being governor of the state anymore. He's proven that he could do it for 8 years. And I think 100% Jay Inslee would angle for a cabinet position. I also disagree about his sincerity about climate change. He stayed in the presidential race for months after it was proven that he couldn't get above 0%. And he was flying all around the country with an entourage and riding in a fleet of SUVs. And if I really believed that climate change was the greatest existential threat to the country, I would not burn that much fossil fuel in an ego run for president. So I just don't trust his sincerity on climate. And I think he will jump ship as quick as he can if, God forbid, we have Joe Biden as president.
Well, I guess we'll see. You're sure that motorcade wasn't a bunch of Priuses?
No, they were SUVs. They were Escalades.
Sure they weren't.
They were Suburbans.
Probably very high efficiency SUVs.
I did the research. Yeah, I'm pretty confident about this.
Okay, so Governor Inslee, of course, is running for a third term. He's been in politics virtually all of his adult life. Dave, you mentioned term limits. Loren Culp is the police chief of a small town, the town of Republic. He has not had any political experience, really. What worries you more, a lifetime politician or a first-time candidate running our state?
First-time candidate, clearly a first-time candidate running our state, yes. Jay may be bored.
We disagree on everything.
But at least I think he knows how to run things.
Dori?
I think we have enough of an infrastructure, both in our state and nationally, with the Constitution, our state Constitution and our national Constitution, our U.S. Constitution, being the foundational framework. I think that we have enough of a foundation to prevent one person from blowing things up completely.
Seriously?
Yeah.
After what we're seeing in Washington, you still believe that?
Yeah.
I used to believe that.
I absolutely believe that. I don't understand if Trump was the evil person that everybody's been telling me for 5 years now, I think it would have manifested itself in a more tangible way than what we've seen. I think there are enough checks and balances. I would much rather have a first timer than a career politician, because career politicians, all they care about is continuing to amass money and power. And there is a level of selfishness. There is a level of just ruthlessness. I think that people can get into politics somewhat pure of heart and motive. I do not think that that is sustainable over any great length of time. When you have a bunch of lackeys surrounding you and you have a bunch of people who are just telling you how great you are and you're bobbing head dollars, I would much rather, when you said obviously, Dave, I was thinking, man, we're really marching to different drums, which makes things so great about KIRO Radio.
Yes. Okay. I'll start with Dave on this next one. As you've heard, Governor Inslee recently broke the law when he brought some Honeycrisp apples from his own tree in Olympia to the fire-scorched regions of Eastern Washington, thinking it was a nice gesture. So it turns out those apples were infected with maggot larvae, and he handed them out even though there is a quarantine in effect. Inslee has apologized. Loren Culp thinks he should be held accountable. It is a misdemeanor. Do you think an apology is enough from the governor?
Well, only if that's a precedent that the rest of us can take advantage of. Yeah. So if he can get off with an apology, then when I transport maggot-infested apples to my friends in Spokane, I should be able to say I'm sorry. And did he have to take the apples back and disinfect them, or what happened to the actual apples?
They're trying to find them.
Yeah.
They're trying to round them up.
Humanely destroyed in some way.
Yeah. I think bringing Olympia apples to Eastern Washington is like bringing cubic zirconia to South Africa. It's the last thing they need. We have the best apples in the world in Eastern Washington, and he's bringing a bunch of maggot-infested apples from Olympia over there. Just the stupidity of that should disqualify him from being governor.
I think clearly we need more apple maggot quarantine area signs on our highways.
Yeah, and enforcers at 150,000 a year. Yeah.
They're there. This is, you need to look. Okay, so final question, because you guys know I'm all about trying to bring everyone together. So whether Inslee gets a third term, I know you think it's a long shot, but if Loren Culp wins, is there any chance of bridging the divide that we are experiencing here in Washington and across the country? But let's look at Washington. What will it take, Dori?
It's really interesting because I do think that the mob, as I and many others call the people who, I mean, look, they go to the members of the Seattle City Council's home and they threaten them. I do think it's domestic terrorism. If you don't vote the way we demand on things like defunding the police, we will come to your home and we will terrorize you. I think that it has been incredibly successful. It never should have been tolerated to the extent that it has. I think that our Department of Justice is correct in declaring Seattle one of 3 anarchist cities in the country, along with Portland and New York City. I think that it's outrageous what's happened around here. And the more you embolden a bully, the more you appease a bully, the worse the bullying will get. And nobody has stood up to them. So no, I don't think, you know, who gets elected governor is going to change the tactics that have metastasized the last 7 months here in our region of smashing windows and terrorizing innocent citizens and demanding they give up their homes because they live in a neighborhood that didn't used to belong to them. I think that these are horrible tactics. I think that it is despicable that we have politicians who have abided by it, and I do not think it's going to change. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Rory, before I get to you, Dave, if I could just do a follow-up, a couple of follow-ups. When you describe the mob, do you think those people are representing the majority of people who are on the left, as you would describe them?
Well, look, I've been talking for, I played a clip from my show from 2.5 years ago, where I talked about the Marxist takeover of Seattle. This is not some bandwagon I've just jumped on for trendiness in the last few months. You know, Shama Sawant on her Socialist Alternative website, they say specifically that they have to tear down things before they can rebuild in their image. And I think that between her and Tammy Morales in Seattle, they're 2 like-minded people who have gotten a lot of stooges to just do their bidding. And I do think there are powerful forces nationally that are trying to tear us apart from within. I'm like I said, I'm not new to this theory. I'm not jumping on some conspiracy bandwagon here. I think that the Democratic Party has dramatically moved towards the socialist / and even further out Marxist ideology. And so yeah, I think that maybe not the mainstream of the people, but the mainstream of politics right now, I think that the mob is right there with the politicians.
Well, there were Marxists during my parents' generation when they were growing up because of the Great Depression, took advantage of economic reverses to try and sell their system. There were Marxists when I was in college during the Vietnam years who wanted to, quote, remake society, and society rejected them. And they'll reject this too. I really don't know why. Well, I think I know why. They're worried about even worse confrontations than happen when you let the looters run free. But the looting is outrageous. I mean, I vividly remember WTO. It started out peaceful. We actually broadcast from the old Memorial Stadium where the demonstrators were assembled. But the looting was nuts. Seeing the National Guard have to come to the city then, I thought was I was depressed. I was depressed that day. I actually went downtown and was going to do the show by phone until Chris Ollinger ordered me back to the station, just to sort of defy this idea that we couldn't go downtown. But I think that you will find, based on some of the people that had to live in that neighborhood while the so-called CHOP was in place, neighbors were not behind that at all. And I think they feel too intimidated to assert themselves. But I think they'll assert themselves at the polls. At least they should. If they don't, then that's on them. That's why we have this system where you can vote people out who don't do right by the city. But no one wants looting. The way small businesses have been treated is crazy. If the idea here is to build wealth, you don't do that by breaking windows. That's wealth destruction. That's the exact opposite of what's supposed to happen. That's what kills neighborhoods. Who's going to invest in a neighborhood if you don't know from moment to moment that a mob of people is going to come by and break your window just because it's there? That's crazy. And I think people will come to understand that. Kshama Sawant she's a movement politician. I've never been quite clear on what she means by bringing socialism to a city. What does that mean? It's very clear that there are a lot of people who are hurting right now and who need economic help. They need help in making the schools more functional for their kids. Sometimes they need help with rent. I mean, socialism can't handle any of these things in the city of Seattle. So I think that, we have an election coming up. I hope people vote. And I just wanted to say again that everybody's concerned, if I vote and my side loses, then my vote was wasted. That's crazy. Just showing up is crucially important because it shows you're out there. If you don't vote, as far as a politician's concerned, you're dead. You don't exist. They do not care about people who don't vote. And the way this manifests itself is we have constant polling going on now, right? And in every poll, you have to decide what the cohort's going to be. The only polls that count for politicians are the ones that poll people who have voting records, who vote all the time. Registered voters, non-voters don't exist. But if you're a regular voter, the polls that involve those voters are the ones the politicians pay attention to between elections and dictate what they'll do. So, I just can't emphasize it enough. I don't care which way you vote, but show them that you exist by mailing that ballot in, for crying out loud. And then we'll find out what people really want from their politicians.
I am looking for that little bit of optimism. So you're saying that maybe we have a chance of bridging the gap if we all go out to vote?
There's going to be a gap. There's going to be debate. Politics is war by other means. It's going to be, there are going to be vigorous debates because people have different opinions. The idea of politics is to solve them without killing each other, okay? But what the problem is when people don't vote and things start going on the wrong track and getting worse and worse and worse, anger builds up, right? Anger builds up. You may call the demonstrators a mob, Dori, and maybe they are. But why is it that I don't go out every night and demonstrate? Because I got other things to do. I got a career, I got a family, I got a life. The fact that there are so many people going out night after night after night tells me that things are not going well for some of them. And I can't simply dismiss that. I'm hoping the reason for it is that the politicians are out of touch and that by putting new politicians in office who are in touch and know how to fix this, that'll work. I think those who think it's going to be fixed by cutting the police force in half are high on something. But if they want to try it, I'd propose the same thing that I did for the schools. If there are neighborhoods that don't think they need the police, okay, you vote on it. Like if Kshama Sawant's district, if District 3 doesn't want cops, let's take them out of District 3 and you can put them in my neighborhood and we'll see which way crime goes. They may be right. There may be ways of using social workers to stop crime. I hope it is. That'd be a lot cheaper, right? Well, but just in case, let's let people choose and see what works.
And I think the reason there are people out there night after night is because there are a lot of people right now with gaping chasms in their soul. And I think that's a very systemic problem. I think the destruction of the family, which has been manipulated in some ways by policies. I think that we're the most childless city in the country. We are the most unchurched city in the country. The things that have traditionally rooted us to each other and to values that I think most of us would like to think are somewhat universal. We don't have that in the Seattle area. We don't have family structure. We don't have church structure. And because of that, I think that our souls, like nature, abhor a vacuum. And I think that there are just a lot of soulless people right now, and they think that smashing a window somehow is going to make their life better. It's getting back to the if everybody's failing, then nobody's failing. What a horrible way to live a life. What a horrible way to go through life. And until we get back to a sense of individuality and the strength of the individual, I'll go to Rudyard Kipling here in the Jungle Book. The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. And until we get back to individuality that is bolstered by family and faith and universal values, I do not have a lot of faith if the window smashers are going to in any way dictate where we go collectively. If they're going to lead us there, I don't want to follow. That's all I know.
Dave and Dori, thank you so much for being part of our first election 2020 town hall. You can always listen to Dave, Seattle's Morning News, 6 to 9 a.m. And of course, the Dori Monson Show from noon to 3. I'm Ursula Reutin. I am on the G and Ursula Show from 9 to noon. And this is 2020 election coverage, KIRO Radio, here for what's next.